Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, we look into some promising new data that shows overdose deaths are declining in Michigan.
We'll try to understand what's behind that decline. And we'll meet a Detroiter who's creating baby dolls that help Black kids to embrace their natural hair.
Plus, with the weather getting colder, we're thinking a lot more about people experiencing homelessness.
Whose responsibility is it to help folks experiencing homelessness and those who are housing insecure?
We want to hear from you about this. In the 11 o'clock hour, we'll open up the phone lines to discuss. Give us a call, 313-577-1019.
Now we begin today's show by sitting down with one of Detroit's agents of change. Here on the Metro, that means someone who's working to meaningfully address a problem in our city. Veronika Scott struggled with poverty and homelessness as a kid. She remembers driving around with her mother, getting sent in circles from one caseworker in Detroit to another in Pontiac. Years later, she took an impactful course at the College for Creative Studies. It was called Designing to Fill a Need. It catalyzed the work she does today, helping people who battle some of the same problems she did. Her organization, Empowerment Plan, employs people living in shelters. They manufacture coats made from sleeping bags that are distributed to folks in need. And that includes people in Detroit, across the nation, and in dozens of other countries. But it's not just about creating jobs for vulnerable people or the coats they're making for folks in need. Veronika Scott is here to explain. Veronika, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here, guys.
So, Veronika, could you give us a better sense of what exactly Empowerment Plan is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a nonprofit based here in Detroit, and we're focused on generational homelessness. And that looks like, for us, hiring individuals from shelters across the city. We have incredible partners from Coalition on Temporary Shelter, Alternatives for Girls, Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, to name a few. We have over a dozen that we hire from, and then we employ people that are either experiencing or have a history of experiencing homelessness to manufacture these coats that turn into sleeping bags. So we produce them on site in our facility on the east side, and we're producing about 12,000 coats this year that are going to go out across the entire U.S., and 20 other countries. Wow. And I think that's just been, it's wild to think that a class project.
Yes, say that 12, number again. How many coats?
Just for this year alone, we're doing about 12,000. And since we began, we've done close to 90,000 coats. And that's been globally, all 7 continents. So I think for us, that has also just been word of mouth. That's just been following the need. So if somebody reaches out to us, whether it's one individual that says, hey, I see this person every day on my way to work, I want to do something, all the way to organizations that reach thousands of people in their respective cities and states. So it's been an incredible journey.
Can you talk a little bit about how Empowerment Plan has grown? Because where it's at right now is it's quite impressive to think about. And as you've said, this is to meet a rising need. But it started as a much smaller little seed.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So it's funny to think about the early days of me being a college student, having no idea what I was doing, running around with what looked like a giant trash bag, which was a prototype of the coat at the time. I had to learn how to sew from my mother. It was like the worst experience of her life. Oh, it was rough. She had to sit there with me as I was trying to sew. I tried also to make it a tent in the beginning, just so you know, you don't have to start with something perfect. Sure. The tent part never worked out. I wanted to use orange construction fencing, and it immediately collapsed. And when it collapsed, I was like, oh, look, a sleeping bag. So, amazing design inspiration. That's really, the creative process right there. And those early days of working and spending time at NSO. So NSO has been one of our longstanding partners. It was at the Toonami Center and loved just their warming center. And the need was so great at that time. There's about 20,000 people counted homeless when I started back in 2010. And then we had over 70,000 abandoned buildings. And so the warming center served a very serious need because there's only a few shelters around.
And when you say NSO, you're talking about the Neighborhood Service Organization. Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Love them.
Linda
oh my
Little.
God. Yeah, they're just such, and we've been, again, they were the first place I started quote unquote volunteering, but spending time at that warming center because there was only a handful of shelters that could maybe house 1,000 people at the time. That was it. Now we've grown since then. Shelters are so important. And when we were looking at it, there were so many people outside that warming center that were just waiting to get in the cold. So 100, 200 people were there in the building. Hundreds would be waiting outside. And so I wanted to create something that if a shelter bed was not available to you, if there wasn't, which is a very real thing happening today as it was then, if a shelter bed's not around and you have to go from one place to another just to stay alive, how can we prevent frostbite? How can we help you in case you are sleeping in an abandoned building?
Sure.
How can we be there for you and be there for the resource teams that are out there doing great work to hopefully get you there so you can get a bed. Just help you survive until you can get into the system, into the shelter, into housing. And that's really our goal.
Veronika, I realize this work is personal for you. You faced some struggles growing up that have really helped to inform your trajectory. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, love to. I always like talking about my own personal experience growing up in homelessness and poverty because I really love to dispel the myth of what homelessness looks like because it doesn't look like anything.
Right.
It's not a defining characteristic. You can't see it, slapped across someone's face that they had been or had experienced homelessness. Some of the most surprising people I've ever met, had to sleep in their car, had to go through a lot of struggles. And so for me, personally growing up in that situation with my parents, they're both really talented, intelligent individuals. Like I think that needs to be said that there are a lot of people that are just trapped, that have no way of getting out. And so growing up in that situation and then starting Empowerment Plan, I just loved doing the work because I could see that there were a lot of people like my parents out there. And personally, I just remember how everyone treated me and my siblings as if we were worthless extensions of our parents. That because my parents struggled with addiction, mental health, employment, everything, people would just look at us like by default, because we were their children, we were bound to have the same life. And you feel like you're digging yourself out of a hole. And so for us, we really focus on parents for that reason. You want, like every parent we've ever talked to is like, why are you doing this? Why are you working so hard and going from shelter to shelter and pushing so hard every day? And they're like, it's my kids. And so I know what that's like. I know how hard my parents worked at that. And still, the struggle is very real and still kind of balanced with that. So for me, it's creating an opportunity I wish my own family had been given. Like if you had 2 years just to pause, focus on all of the things, not just income, which is so important, but housing, childcare, transportation, mental health, food security, all those things. If you just had time to figure some of those things out without being sent across the city, would you be in a better place?
Veronika, I want to get into something you mentioned a little bit earlier, but you said generational homelessness. And I had never heard that. I've never heard that before until today. So if you can just get into that a little bit more and just talk about how it connects to you and your personal experiences growing up and how that you did feel like you were kind of born in a hole there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think there's also a lot of people that I know I've personally worked with over the years that the shelter is the only place that they've experienced growing up. I know from talking to incredible executive directors of other organizations, other shelters, where they'll see generations of the same family. They're like, I know her mom, she used to stay here, I know her daughter, I know her grandbabies now. And so I think that's, and yes, we'll see a number of like how many people that shelter served or how many people had to utilize those beds, but it was really surprising to me. It's like how many of those individuals have been kind of year over year needed that, but also generation after generation needed it. And when you're growing up in it, it's so hard to get, you're starting off in a hole that you have to dig yourself out of. They did a study in Chicago that said, this was 10 years ago, it hasn't gotten much better, that a single woman needed to go to over 72 different organizations to get out of poverty. That's a single woman, let alone imagine if you had 3 kids. You're taking the bus, you're trying to get places.
Impossible.
It's impossible. And so for me, there are so many great childcare, early education, amazing programs for kids that are in schools, outside of school. But we know if that kid goes home to instability and trauma and things of that nature, the work can't be as successful. And so I think that's what I think about, was like, I had great teachers, but then I still went home to what I went home to. And how can we help parents create that home, or be there for their kids when they get home from school, or have the capacity to know that they have food, they have the rent check paid for, they have all of these things. Those are the big things, just like to take that oppressive fear off your shoulders for a little, that constant terror of like, what's going to happen next? How can we help that family? So that's what we mean by generational, is like by working with parents, and by working with individuals that have dependents and family that they take care of, how is that impacting a community? Because we know impacting a mom has a very powerful impact in the community.
Veronika Scott is the founder of Empowerment Plan, and we're talking about providing warmth and opportunity to people experiencing homelessness. This is The Metro on WDET-FM. I'm Tia Graham here with Robin Vincent. And later in the show, during the 11 o'clock hour, we're going to continue the conversation about homelessness by taking your calls. How do you interact with our homeless neighbors? Let us know by calling 313-577-1019. But Veronika, just listening to you talk about that a little bit and thinking about, food on the table or rent or bills being paid, the kids also absorb so much of that stress and anxiety as well. Kids are at home thinking, I don't know if I'm going to have electricity when I get home because the bill wasn't paid. And I know it wasn't paid. Even at the youngest 6, 7 years old, the kids are absorbing that anxiety and that strife from their parents. So I would love to just tap into that a little bit, if you can, just what it does to the kids in that environment.
My mom, when I asked her about this, I've talked with her a lot. She told me, she's like, we owned nothing and it owned us. It takes over everything. It takes over, even as a kid, and like my mom would sew amazing stuffed animals for me for the holidays and things like that. Like, they would work to cover that. And I know so many parents are out there doing that, doing their best so that their kids don't feel it, but they can see it on your face. They can see it on their parents. They can see the stress. They can feel it. And I think what I hear a lot of from a lot of people is like, I barely felt it, but I knew it was there, especially as a kid that grew up in poverty. And so I think that's really, to give credit that the struggle, you're doing a great job. It is incredibly hard. And one of the things that we've seen is just like, how can we help support parents that go into schools, work with the teachers? Because when I was going through it, I had teachers that I remember getting an award that was least likely to show up on time because my parents struggled. It was like, just that awareness around like that has changed. Thank goodness.
So counterproductive.
Thank goodness that has changed. But like having empathy for where these kids are coming from, what they're dealing with at home. And then I had teachers that were just like the most game-changing people ever that saw something in me. So just remember to be that game-changing person. It doesn't take much, just like a smile, high five,
that's right.
Not doing the shame-based anything.
That's
like,
right. Veronika, you've been talking about some of the services, the actions that would have made an impact in helping you and your family when you all were struggling with housing and poverty. Could you talk more about the missing links in the system and how you're trying to fill those gaps? Yeah,
that's something I'm deeply passionate about. I think for me, there's a lot of great organizations, especially in Detroit. We have a ton of nonprofits. We have a ton of good nonprofits that serve a lot of people. And I think one of the things that's always tough is that we're almost told to be pitted against each other, that we're competing, which is so counterintuitive. We're serving the same people. We're trying to help these individuals move on, but we're told that like, oh, if you get this money, then I can't get this money. And then that we're competing for these dollars.
I've heard that.
When the reality is, it's like if we can collectively move the needle, like we don't, as Empowerment Plan, don't exist if shelters don't exist. We can't. We need them as partners. And so that's where we hire people. That's how we help move the needle. And so we work together. We have like 15 different nonprofit partners that we work with just for hiring. Detroit at Work, like I said, all these amazing organizations. And one of the challenges I've seen is that competitiveness also means you're not collaborating. And one of the things that I want to see as a sector is like, how can we collaborate more? How can we share data? How can we share information so that we don't have to re-traumatize a person every time they step in our door? Okay, you told them your story yesterday, and it was a horrible one. I'm really sorry. Can you tell that to me again so I can get the same information? It's really hard to do that, to ask somebody to keep on saying and like have to start over at every new place. So at Empowerment Plan, we like to bring the nonprofits on site. So when you're working with us, you're spending 60% of the time making the coats, and then the other 40% of paid time is dedicated to wraparound services. So we bring on Pro Literacy Detroit to run our GED programming. We run, financial health and wellness with Community Financial Credit Union. We bring on these different entities like Digital Essentials with Journey. So they come on site and run the program instead of expecting somebody to be like, all right, you worked 9 to 5, and then now I'm going to ask you to go to a night GED class that may be free, but how are you getting there? Where are the kids going? It's not really free.
Veronika, we are running out of time here. I have 2 rapid fire questions for you.
Go for it.
One is, tell me something you've learned from doing this work that's been surprising, and then we're going to have you tell folks how they can support the Empowerment Plan.
I think one thing that's been surprising to me lately is that homelessness, and I think this was surprising to a lot of people, homelessness looks different in every community, and
That's right.
It is taken care of differently in every city, in every state, in every country. It is completely different, and I think that was just mind-boggling to me when I started, and still to this day, how different it is. And if you can go to empowermentplan.org to learn more about the work that we're doing, and you can support coats going out to those in need or those that we hire.
Veronika Scott, founder of Empowerment Plan, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. And later in the show, during the 11 o'clock hour, we're going to continue the conversation about homelessness by taking your calls. How do you interact with your homeless neighbors? And whose responsibility is it to address housing and homelessness? Let us know by calling in. The number is 313-577-1019.
We'll talk to you soon, Veronika.
Sounds good.
Coming up, there's some encouraging news about the number of overdose deaths in Michigan. We'll talk with an intervention specialist to find out what's changing. Stay right there. Metro on WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent, taking a look at the weather for this holiday week. Today, we've got rain after 1 p.m. and a high of 50 degrees. Tomorrow, the sun will come out and we'll see a high of just 41 degrees. Wednesday, it will be rainy after 1 p.m. and another high of 41 degrees. Then on Thanksgiving Day, we might see a little bit of snow in the morning with another high of 41 degrees. That's apparently a lucky number for this week.
I guess so. The snow on Thanksgiving, not so much, but it's Michigan.
You're a
What can you
Michigander.
expect? I know.
Come on.
Born
come
and
on,
raised.
T.
Coming up in the 11 o'clock hour, we are taking your phone calls, and we want to know, how do you interact with your homeless neighbors? And whose responsibility is it to address housing and homelessness? Once again, let us know. It's 313-577-1019.
But first, overdose deaths in Michigan and around the country have been skyrocketing over the past 2 decades. But we've recently gotten some good news in the spaces of addiction and overdose. Data from the state of Michigan says that overdose deaths decreased more than 6% from 2022 to 2023.
What's more, emergency department visits for non-fatal drug poisoning has declined by about 14,000 visits from 2018 to 2022. Those are people who are hospitalized because they could die from an overdose. This means that while Michigan's overdose deaths have been higher than the national average, they are now dropping faster when compared to other states.
Now, the main drug that's killing people is the synthetic opioid, fentanyl. And the thing that has reversed the deaths of so many Michiganders is naloxone, a medication that blocks the effects of opioids. Sam Corey sat down with Steve Norris. Sam Corey, that is our amazing producer, one of many here on the Metro. And Steve Norris is the director of overdose prevention and recovery support for the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities, a very short name there. That's a Troy nonprofit.
Steve says one reason for the lower overdose deaths is the distribution of naloxone. He also points to the spread of intervention specialists who work together across Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties. Steve and Sam began by discussing why overdose deaths are down in Michigan.
So let's start here. Why are overdose deaths declining in Michigan?
We can kind of look at some of the data points with the distribution of naloxone that's been made available to Michigan through MDHHS's portal. We can look at increased access to services that were unavailable to a lot of people and connections to those services. And then I think the third determining factor is the increase in education and awareness around substances such as fentanyl and how to use and implement naloxone in our communities with other than first responders.
And naloxone, of course, reverses potential overdose.
Correct. So naloxone as a molecule, the medication is the antidote for reversal for opioid or opiate exposure.
There are also a lot of programs, both through the police departments or connected to them, that try to meet people on the street if they're struggling with addiction or overdose. Do you think that has a hand in the decline as well?
I do. Those outreach services, the post-overdose follow-up, which is what you're referring to, which is known nationally as a quick response team. We go out and meet individuals when they're in the midst of either a crisis or post-overdose so that we can connect them to the services that are available to help them enter into a pathway of recovery so that they can live a beautiful life moving forward.
I'm wondering where overdose deaths are declining fastest in Michigan, particularly Southeast Michigan.
Well, we'd love to think that we are, but we don't try to become braggadocious. I will say this. We know that probably 2 weeks ago, MDHHS came out with a release that they've got reductions in the state of around 5.7. Here in Oakland County, our preliminary numbers last month, we've got a 30% reduction in overdose fatalities. We're attributing a lot of that to mass distribution of naloxone, community education, and expanded services that are available to our community.
And where in Oakland County are overdose deaths going down the fastest?
So pretty much all of Oakland County, but if you look at the highest rate of incidents, our two major areas of concern are Pontiac and Waterford Township. So those are where we're really seeing significant numbers and reduction, and that's where we put a lot of our emphasis. We put a lot of education, and we put a lot of distribution of naloxone in play.
Pontiac and Waterford are a little bit poorer in Oakland County. I wonder what you make of the tie between just poverty or joblessness and overdose deaths.
You can obviously see that those are contributing factors. When we have, disenfranchised communities or communities that are struggling with the things that they need, such as housing security, food security, economic stability, we see that human beings find a tendency to cope with some of those challenges in life. So they're going to use substances to cope with that.
Why do you think that is? Like, what is happening? Is there a certain level of despair that's higher? Is there just lack of resources, lack of supports available? Is everybody stretched so thin they're working multiple jobs so they don't feel like they have time to deal with something that's complicated? I think addiction and overdose are multi-causal. There's multiple things happening there that end up causing it.
Well, that's such a complicated question. So I can only answer that question for myself. So if you didn't know, I'm someone that, had a co-occurring mental health and substance use disorder my own self. The things that I did was I turned to those substances to relieve me of some of those pressures, whether it be financial or, my own personal growth, some of that. I would guess that other individuals are turning to substances to find relief like that as well. And if it's not substances, it's something else that is really not enhancing our life, but taking away from it because we're looking for that immediate satisfaction of the pain and suffering that we're going through at the time. And so I only speak that from my own experience.
I'm wondering what the long-term supports or connections that can sort of alleviate addiction, because I think you're right. I mean, people want out of the pain, and it's a hard thing to get out of the pain in the long term. I'm wondering what you think are some of the long-term antidotes.
So, yes, these are such great questions. What I do know is some of the measures that we've taken in terms of triaging a very complicated issue, especially with substance use, in a short period of time, whether it's through medication or rehabilitational facilities, so on and so forth, is not the long game. The long game, from what I see in communities across the country, and really, really have to give credit for Oakland County, is strengthen community and support from social structures. That's where we really make the difference, because at least for myself, we've been deemed as there's something wrong with us. And when we have that lift from community partners, social structures, family, so on and so forth, that really tends to make the difference for long-term reductions in some of those unhealthy coping mechanisms as you move through that journey of sobriety.
The question I ask is what provides meaning in life? And finances provide stability, but money doesn't necessarily translate to meaning. The things that seem to provide that kind of meaning is connection. And I guess there's connection to people, and then there's connection to places and connection to hobbies and sports and work. And I'm wondering, does that mean we should be investing a lot more in parks, in recreation centers, in sports activities, in different public spaces for people to go to connect with one another? Are those things you think about?
For me, that is something I absolutely think about. I no longer want to give this problem over to our clinical partners and our medical field and stuff like that to solve this problem. I would love to invest in community structures, the ones that you're talking about, centers for people to come together and gather and share their failures with other people that are in the struggle, hold them up and say, look, I've been there. I've failed there too. Here's what I did if you'd like to try it. That has been very successful in the long game over 50, 75, 100 years of how do we help individuals that are struggling.
If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Steve Norris. He's the Director of Recovery Support and Overdose Prevention for the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities, a nonprofit based in Troy. Steve, I want to push you a little bit on the downslide in numbers. Overdose deaths have been really high in Michigan in comparison with other states across the country. I'm wondering if the decline we're seeing is something that's just like a little bit of a natural slide back to sort of where the average has been.
That is something that we've all debated. And before we started to celebrate what we look at with preliminary reduction in these rates, we don't want to be too excited about maybe just a shift towards, evening things out. We do want to look at data when we're looking at these things. And what we know is the increase of distribution, the increase of access, the increase of agencies like ours that are out there engaging with our community and standing side by side with them to connect them to services. It really plays a part. So even though we're seeing these drastic reductions, there is an evening out period, but we'd be foolish to think that this crisis is anywhere near being over. We've got more powerful substances coming into our communities that are being adulterated into the drug supply, such as nitazines. And when we thought fentanyl was the big bad monster, there's always another big bad monster down the road. Those are the things we're looking for the future, because we all know that prohibition hasn't and doesn't work in this country, and people are going to seek those things, and some, a small percentage, are going to become dependent on those things and then have substance use disorders related to.
The big problem here that you just mentioned is fentanyl, and as a drug, it's just technologically very, very powerful. I wonder if that is part of the concern here in terms of addiction, even unhealthy relationships to things, and overdose. The technologies, be them drugs or even media platforms, social media platforms, have gotten very, very strong and very, very addicting. I'm thinking about weed. I'm thinking about gambling, which is now legal and online. Do you think about that a lot, that the technology of these things just becoming too powerful for human capacity?
I do, and it horrifies me, quite frankly. I mean, if we look at the way that we've accelerated across all social areas, whether it's technology sector or economic sector, when it comes to substances, we've done the same. We've evolved to a point that we live in a synthetic world. We've got synthesized drugs that we're now taking in that are causing catastrophic and devastating effects to the neurology of the brain. You mentioned marijuana, for example, and that's another category. It's not the marijuana that I was used to in the 80s. It's 2024, and we've got variations and strands that have been synthetically enhanced to be more powerful and more dangerous, and that cuts across all sectors, including alcohol.
I want to go back to some of the good news. Emergency department visits for non-fatal drug poisonings, according to the state of Michigan, are projected to be down by about 10,000. So the way I read that is people are going to the ER because they may die from drug poisoning, but then they get the help that they need there. What this means to me is that there are a lot fewer people who even need to go to the ER for emergency supports. Is that the right way to read the data? That's really good interpretation of the data. I have a little bit of fear with that data. And let me tell you what my fear is. My fear is that if we give more access to naloxone for community and people aren't using our medical facilities to go to get that help, then how are we treating them if we never see them? How are we connecting them to long-term services? I know that there are other people besides myself in this area that are concerned about that data, and they're interpreting it in different ways. And so, that is a major concern. As we increase access, we are reducing fatalities, but in the long game, and this is the long game, how are we engaging with those people that are suffering? How are we connecting them to services, and how are we supporting them at a boot level, on the ground situation so that this doesn't continue to happen repetitively for them? Your theory here is that it's great, naloxone and overdose reversing drugs and technologies and what have you. Like anything that can stop a death is great. But This is a bigger problem than a one-time thing. And if you don't connect people to services and to other folks that can help them in some kind of way, then the problem's just not going to go away. Correct. And so, to make it very simple, I'm concerned that people are overdosing in our communities. They're not going to our medical facilities to seek that support, and they're being treated at home with reversal medications like naloxone, and they're never actually engaging in services to help them with their root problem. And so, those are not just my fears, but other colleagues throughout the industry that share the same fears, and we're digging in that data to see if the value of, reducing those fatalities and saving human life is really going to help treat people with substance use disorder in the long run. Steve, I want to focus in on the people who are most likely to overdose, so I guess folks can be aware. Who is most at risk of overdose in the state and in your work out in the field? We refer to those individuals as PWUD, people who use drugs. Anyone and everyone who's engaged in substances, illicit and otherwise, mostly illicit, is at a danger for a potential overdose. What we know is that by testing out in the field, that 86% of the substances that are tested after they're confiscated contain potentially deadly doses of fentanyl. So anyone out there experimenting for the first time or perhaps using over periods of time or binging when it comes to illicit substances are at a risk for a potential overdose.
That was producer Sam Corey speaking with Steve Norris. He works for the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities. They were discussing why overdose deaths are dropping in Michigan. If you're struggling with addiction, there are a number of places to go for help. You can call 988 or call the Michigan Addiction Hotline. That number is 866-210 1303.
Coming up, we'll talk with a Detroiter who's making black dolls to help kids embrace their natural hair. You all stay right there.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And Robin, I often think about hair, my hair. I do a lot of it all the time, often actually. And I think about the hair on top of other people's hairs and how it matters to us so much in this society. It's the color, the length, style. It all signals different perceptions or ideas of that person. Hair is the thing we're judged by. It's also something that gives us confidence and a sense of self-worth. And we know that the beauty industry, especially hair, is big business. And when we think about black women, hair is everything. From chemicals used to straighten it, to the pressing comb that often left burning memories, even to the braids that were too tight. Black women go through great lengths to be, quote unquote, presentable. And that's because when you don't have hair that is seen as beautiful by the mainstream, it's often hard to see the beauty in yourself. This is why a Detroiter decided to create a doll with kinky, coily, curly hair for young black kids of color. The doll is a blend of the creator's creative aspirations with entrepreneurial spirit, and she hopes to connect young people to self-love. Joining the show to talk more about Healthy Roots dolls is Yalitza. Welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that is Yalitza Jean Charles, to be exact.
That is correct.
Yes. So the company, you know what, before I get into that first question, what part of Detroit?
Oh my goodness. I am a transplant. I've been here for almost 5 years.
What was it about Detroit that brought you here? I always wonder when I hear about a transplant coming here and kind of setting up shop and turning it to home. What made you turn Detroit to home?
Oh, that's such a great question. I originally came here through Ohio, actually, and I'm a native New Yorker. So I've always been attracted to cities, the culture, the people, what you learn from each other, the community that you can build. And when I saw Detroit was growing in that way, especially with supporting entrepreneurs, and I had the opportunity to come here through an accelerator program, I said, why not? There were so many people who I didn't even realize were based here, so many entrepreneurs who were inspiring me that I discovered here and got to meet, and I was amazed by it. So I thought it was a great place to continue growing.
I think about Black Tech Saturdays and the ecosystem. Yes, the ecosystem that it's creating, and you just came to mind. Like, that's the perfect place for someone like you trying to build your business. I love that. So the company Healthy Roots Dolls started out as a class project. And while you were attending Rhode Island School of Design, what was the project and what originally came to mind?
Yes, so while studying at RISD, I was doing an illustration major, and the class project was actually in 3D illustration, where I actually took Rapunzel, who, typically has this very long hair, and it's straight, and it's blonde, and I got to reimagine her as a little brown-skinned girl with kinky, curly, coily hair, and a lot of my classmates were like, wow, that actually kind of looks like a doll. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I can see it. I see it.
I love it too because once again, Rapunzel's known for this long, straight, beautiful,
blonde hair.
I think about Tangled, love Tangled so much. But I think about that look there. So when your classmates are seeing this for the first time, you're seeing this for the first time, you get this idea, a doll. When that sparked, did you think I can actually create a doll that could be seen across the country?
No. I was like, this is a class project. I did not come to school to make toys. But when we had the conversation online, because I shared the project with other people, like my classmates, my peers, my friends, it started a conversation with other women of color where we realized, I actually never had a doll that had my nose, my lips, my skin, my hair, all in the same thing, and actually made it feel like I saw myself in my toys and that I could actually learn to love my hair. Because what I realized is we were getting a lot of dolls that were painted brown, and you have to do more than paint a doll brown in order to connect with children of color.
I mean, Robin, you
we were
felt
talking
that.
about this. Yes. I mean, as an Arab American, I never saw growing up dolls that looked like me. I saw blonde haired dolls with very fine features, and it really. It took a toll on me in ways I didn't really understand until probably at the point where I decided to dye my hair blonde. And I'll tell listeners I have naturally like dark brown, almost black hair. And I realize now, looking back at that time period, that was me trying to conform to a certain beauty standard that society had told me I needed in order to be beautiful.
Robin and Yalitza, bringing you back into this conversation and bringing Robin's tidbit in there as well. When we think about, because I was so interested about, putting the doll together and getting it all assembled and what it looks like. You talked about painting, and it's more than just painting. How are you finding the different dolls, the different, I guess you can say, molds there? Ooh. And then as well with the hair, because I know for Black women it's a lot to go to the beauty supply, finding different hair and matching it and all this other stuff. So how did you do it for the dolls?
So this is the part that I love because I get to remind people that I went to art school and I learned how to make things. So I actually do not manually make the dolls myself. These are mass produced, but I did design them. Yeah. And that gave me the opportunity to make my own custom molds inspired by the features that I saw around me. So looking at some of the actresses at the time that were really popular, like Lupita Nyong'o and Viola Davis, and the women in my life and my family being like, I love just your face in general. Like, it's gorgeous. Like, I would love to bring that onto a doll. So doing like a wider nose, fuller lips. So I got to design that, and I took it from sketch to 3D rendering to mass production, getting the mold created. And then with the hair, that is the most challenging part. Yes. Because the industry only knows what the industry already does. And so I'm forcing them to learn how to mimic something different, something that hasn't been represented. And I spent a lot of time watching little wigs dry, like washing them with shampoo, using the conditioner, doing puck braids, bantu knots. So I spent a lot of time manually working with the hair myself until I found the fiber that mimicked the experience I wanted kids to have the best. So it was a labor of love, and I did it for the kids.
Wow. And once again, for folks who aren't really, up to speed or understand what it takes to go through all of that, I mean, it takes a lot, and it takes a lot to process the hair and to put the hair together. And like you said, washing it, blow drying, pressing, flack, or whatever you're going to do to it to make sure that it holds up for a long time, but also holds up in a kid's hand so they can learn how to use it. So if you are just listening to the Metro, just tuning in to the Metro on WDET Public Radio, I'm Tia Graham here with Robin Vincent, and we're chatting with the founder of Healthy Roots Dolls, Yalitza Jean Charles. And we're talking about the kinky curly hair dolls that she's helped manufacture and create herself. Staying on topic of representation, let's talk about what the reception has been like from little kids when they see it. What do they do?
Okay, so the first thing is always, oh my gosh, she looks just like me. We have a lot of unboxing videos when the girls are screaming. And does the doll look exactly like this kid? No, not exactly like them, but enough for them to see themselves in it. And I think that's so beautiful. So we went from our first doll, Zoe, to creating two more different dolls with different skin tones. They have different facial features, different hair textures to represent the beauty of the diaspora so that more children could see themselves in our products. And my favorite part is actually watching kids do matching hairstyles. So the curl friends get to be a part of wash day, and they get to do like matching twists, matching braids, and they literally drag these dolls all over the place. So I think the reception has been good.
I mean, just seeing a little girl with her doll on wash day would just set my soul on fire, because wash day is one of the days that I dread myself. So
it's a great day. Yeah.
For me, it's just like, oh gosh, here we go. But, when we talk about self-worth once again and representation, and Robin talked about it a little bit as well, just not really seeing yourself represented, especially growing up. For me, it really did suck not seeing that. So what does it do for self-worth, especially for young Black girls, young girls of color, and then hair education? Yeah. That's a huge thing.
So when I was doing my research to develop the product, because it wasn't just enough to have the idea, I had to understand what the problem was and how I could potentially solve it in a way that had true impact. So the problem is the fact that over 50% of children in this country are of color. But the toy aisle, when I started, did not fully reflect that. And then when I did more research, I learned that only 4 out of 10 girls love their curls. And it should be 10 out of 10.
It should be 10 out of 10.
It should be 10 out of 10. And then when I started studying and doing more research, I discovered the Brown versus Board of Education trial where they did the Mamie Clark doll test, which measured racial bias in children with baby dolls. And they ascribed negative attributes to the black dolls and positive attributes to the white dolls. So what we know from the research is that toys influence how kids think, act, and see themselves. So when little black girls can't find dolls that look like them, it can negatively impact their self-esteem. So if we have 50% of the country which has kids of color, they need to have products that look like them.
Oh, man, I just once again love everything that this stands for, and especially when we get into hair education. For me growing up, I had a Brad style head, and I would often use the Brad style head, but it's not representative of the head that grew on my hair. I learned a lot from it, don't get me wrong, but I could have went a step further if I had hair that was textured like mine on a doll's head. So can you go into the hair education, especially for young girls?
So for me, I was very fortunate that my mother was a woman who could braid. She would do like hearts and stars, and I learned from her, and I was practicing on my dolls, but it still wasn't the same experience. And it wasn't until college that I actually learned how to take care of my hair as it naturally grew out of my scalp. So when I saw that impact that toys have on children, I saw an opportunity to use it as an educational hair tool, because girls are already playing with their doll's hair, but if they could have something that actually mimicked their real hair that they could use real hair care products on, we could take it a step further, because there is an issue within the black community of young black girls not knowing how to love and take care of their hair. We think our hair is difficult. We're being difficult on our hair. Our hair is not difficult. We need to learn to love our hair and allow it to do what it does. If it's growing up towards the sun, that's great. Let it do that. And here are the products we can use to take care of it. And they learn that by practicing on the dolls, which is why I think wash day is fun, because now you have your doll to play with while your mom or dad or whoever's watching you is doing your hair. So we get to bring in the hair education and empower them to love their hair rather than feeling like they have to change it in order to be beautiful.
And when you talk about, that's why you love wash day, and I hear you say that, I think about possibly if I would have had something that would have been a little bit more, looked more like me or represented me, maybe I wouldn't hate wash day so much. Maybe I would have a little better connection to it.
We need to get you a doll.
No, exactly. So I can get back to practicing like I used to. I love doing hair. So I would love to get one of the dolls as well. But just thinking about, how we connected, you and I, we connected organically on social media, just saw it there, reached out to you, and you were receptive. So it was great to bring you onto the Metro today. But I also was snooping, and I saw that you were attending a seminar at Harvard. What was it like being in that historically white space, and what were some of the things that you were there to learn?
Oh, it was so interesting, because I was actually talking to my friends about my college experience. Because, everyone's like, shoot for the stars, apply to every Ivy. And walking on that campus, I was like, you know what? I went to the school I was supposed to go to, and that's fine. I do definitely think that we are allowed to be in those spaces as well. And I think about how important diversity is as a part of your education, because you're not just learning from your professors, you're learning from your peers. So I did enjoy, when I did get on campus, hearing people speaking in different languages and seeing how diverse it was. And it gave me the opportunity to connect with other entrepreneurs in the social impact space and recognize how important it is to run our businesses as businesses so that we can have bigger impact.
Yes. And once again, it's about Healthy Roots Dolls and where you all see yourselves in the future, next 10 years, next 5 years, next 10 years. Where do you see yourself?
A movie. No, I was kidding. I'm still waiting for my moment to run into a little kid holding my doll. I get lots of people that I know who take pictures and be like, I saw a girl with your doll. I saw a girl with your doll. I think that's great. We definitely want to expand and create more products. That's really important to us. So not just the dolls, but creating more educational experiences through play with new products, and just continuing to spread curl power.
Curl power. Do you have that trademarked?
Yes.
Oh, I love that. Curl power. Oh my gosh. Yalitza Jean Charles is the founder of Healthy Roots Dolls. Healthy Roots Dolls can be found at healthyrootsdolls.com. Yalitza, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro today.
Thank you for having me.
From the WDET newsroom, Congress members Debbie Dingell and Rashida Tlaib are co-sponsoring new legislation that could create the country's first permanent federal water affordability program. They're calling it the H2O Up Act. It's an expansion of an existing program from Dingle and Talib that they launched in 2021.
Coming up on the second hour of the Metro, we'll continue our conversation with Veronika Scott from Empowerment Plan, and we will welcome in Chad Audi from the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries. And we'll hear from you, Robin. What is going on?
Yeah, we want to know how you interact with your homeless neighbors. And we're wondering who you think has the responsibility to address housing and homelessness. Let us know by calling in. The number is 313-577-1019.
And, I think this is a good time, Robin, for us to kind of get into a little bit of our personal connections with our homeless neighbors and the way we interact. For me, if I have extra, I'm going to give extra. Every
same.
time, if I have it in my hands or in my pockets and I know I can give it, I'm going to.
Same.
It's the least I think I can do in that situation.
I agree. I spend a good amount of time sitting with folks on the street who are experiencing homelessness. And I've had people cry in my arms and say that they haven't had human touch in years. I've had people tell me that they feel like they are the unsavory characters of society, that they have been just ignored and swept aside. And I think even just we know homelessness and housing insecurity looks like a lot of different things, and folks living on the streets is just one facet of that, and that's specifically what you and I are talking about in this moment. But when it comes to those folks, I think even just an acknowledgement.
Indeed, Robin. And we definitely want to hear from you. So give us a call, 313-577-1019. We'll be back with more of the Metro after the news from NPR on 1019 WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio. It's 11 o'clock. Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. This hour, we're opening up the phone lines. We want to know how you interact with your homeless neighbors and whose responsibility is it to address housing and homelessness. Let us know by calling in now. The number is 313-577-1019. And we're talking about this because as the weather gets colder, many of us are retreating inside and turning up the heat. But shelter and heat are not guaranteed for everyone. There are many reasons people experience homelessness or housing insecurity. Advocates say the biggest ones are a lack of affordable housing and a low income.
The scarcity of affordable housing is compounded by other issues vulnerable people face, like a lack of a strong social safety net. In other words, if you don't have people to fall back on during financial hardship, it can mean missing rent and facing an eviction. And that's when the problems snowball. That eviction makes it harder to find another place to live. Other factors that contribute to homelessness include health problems and domestic violence.
Chad Audi is the president of the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, where he oversees multiple shelters and food banks across the city and offers services to people in need. He joins us now in the studio. We also have Veronika Scott with us. She's the founder of Empowerment Plan. It employs people experiencing homelessness and offers them ways to carve paths out of poverty and towards stability. Welcome, Chad and Veronika.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Chad, we will start with you. We want to get a better sense of what you're seeing right now. How many people across your shelters are you housing at the moment?
We are housing across the emergency shelters only about 750 people every single night. But throughout all our organization, we have about 2,500 people every single night today.
2,500 people every single night. Can you talk a little bit about the demographics? Tell us what groups of folks are accessing your shelters the most.
Actually, we have them all, from cradle all the way to senior citizens, unfortunately. So the bulk of it is women and children. And we have actually, we are right now the only provider for single men in the city of Detroit.
That's one of my questions actually, Chad, to you was about that specific thing there, men in shelters, and the importance that there is a space for men in shelters, especially with you all.
Yeah, most providers, they closed their shelters for men. We became the only provider for men right now in the city of Detroit, simply because it is very costly and there is a lot of money available for an organization to be able to provide for this particular population. And then for fundraising factors, usually a picture of a woman and children brings more attention to when you see a single man. And also we need to note that there is a single man, but also we are a provider of single men with children, because people tend to forget that sometimes there is certain men who actually have the custody of their children,
Sure.
and they are homeless. So, but we don't talk about it much because usually people view men as more solid or more independent, but the facts are not truly the same as the reality.
Yes, Chad, and we will definitely get more into that as we continue on with the segment. But Chad, let's look more deeply at the folks you see in the shelters. What are some of the circumstances that they face that lead them to the shelter? Can you talk about some of those misconceptions there?
It varies. Now, first of all, people, they have a different perspective of homeless. The panhandler is not a homeless, and people portray a person who stand on the corner of a streets or on the highway that these are homeless. Those are panhandlers, and we need to differentiate between the homeless and the panhandler. Homeless people are usually people, like you said earlier, could be domestic violence victim, could be lost their job. Like me, if I lose my job for 2 or 3 weeks, I become homeless. There is people who have mental health issues, and there's people with substance abuse issues that cause them to become homeless. So there is a lot of underlying factor that cause the person to become homeless. It doesn't just happen overnight. And in the city of Detroit, we have about 7,000 homeless people right now, of which there's more than 1,150 who do not have beds. And this is the bigger problem that we are facing today. But for the population that we're serving, we see all kinds. We see people who, there's different level of service that everyone needs. The people who have mental health issues, they need more extra services because they will become functionable and be able to work if they get their medication on time. So they need somebody to be with them at all time versus somebody who just they're working homeless. This is another. So you got working homeless who actually go during the day and work, and they need a place to come. People who are making minimum wage or even making $15 an hour, and with 3 kids, they can't afford being in any house in the metro area. So therefore, they come to our shelters.
And this is the Metro on WDET. We're talking about the problem of homelessness today. We have Chad Audi from Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries and Veronika Scott from Empowerment Plan to help us better understand the many ways homelessness manifests here in Detroit and Metro Detroit. And we also want to hear from you. How do you interact with people experiencing homelessness, and who should be responsible for addressing homelessness? Let us know by calling 313-577-1019.
Veronika Scott, I'd like to point out you hire folks from the same shelters that Chad Audi oversees to work for you at Empowerment Plan. We'll get into that a little bit more, what that looks like. But first, something we talked about earlier, and for those who are just tuning in, I want to go back to it. I realize this work, it's personal for you. Can you remind listeners the circumstances you faced growing up that made it hard for you and your family to keep stable housing?
Yeah, I personally grew up I have lived experience. So I grew up in a situation of homelessness and poverty with my parents. They struggled with mental health, addiction, unemployment. And we spent a lot of time bouncing around, looking at a lot of the evictions that you're talking about and a lot of what Chad is talking about. And, we don't exist without our shelter partners. And, there are times when my family utilizes those services too. So I can say how important they are.
And that also brings to mind something we discussed that there are, and something you've pointed out already, Chad, that there are a lot of different faces of homelessness and housing insecurity. That seems really important to point out. And I realize that you mentioned, Chad, that panhandlers you might not necessarily think of as you don't believe are necessarily homeless, but we know there are people living on the streets with all their belongings. I mean, I those are the folks I was mentioning to Tia that I interact with, and they're killing time during the day until they can get into the shelter sometimes.
Yes. When I'm talking about the panhandlers not necessarily being homeless, because there is a lot. If you go to certain areas in the city of Detroit or the border of Detroit, you will see the same people standing every day, and every time they change the message. Those individuals not necessarily homeless. They go there. This is a part of the job. Does that mean, though, that you shouldn't be helping them or they're not good people or whatever? I'm not to judge them, but I can say that this is not the representation of the homeless. Homeless population are like me and everybody else. They're good people going through some hard times that cause them not to have a place to live. And this is how they become homeless. So then we would need to provide them with the service that they need, protecting their dignity and respect at all time. So when they lose their place where to have a good meal and a place to lay their head and feel comfortable, this is what we do for them, because we want them to be able to recharge and go back and become independent. So we are that. Shelter is just a small portion of the service that we provide to get them back on their feet, and it shouldn't be a long stay usually in the shelter. We strive to make sure that people go out of the shelter, and this is why it's very important to have the collaboration with Veronika and her organization, because without doing the end work, which is create something that they can sustain them being able to be independent, they will remain on your shelter. So the Empowering Plant and Veronika with her heart was able to close that gap by bringing an opportunity for people that they're looked at as second generation. A second-class citizen, unfortunately, and be able to bring them back and show that they are good people with good heart. If they get the opportunity and they get the training, that they will become back independent and they can do the good work. This is the population, the homeless population we're talking about. And there is, like I said earlier, there's people who are stuck in alcohol and drugs, and without fixing the issue as well, they will keep going and coming back. So that's why we do inpatient and outpatient treatment program to address those issues. Otherwise, people will keep, it will be a revolving door for homeless coming in and coming out, and we won't be able to fix the problem.
What I'm hearing from both of you is that you have to offer a lot of different services, that it has to be very holistic in order to address these big gaps when we're talking about things like mental health, domestic violence. What, for each of you, tell me, what are some of the biggest challenges of being service providers in this sphere of homelessness and housing?
I'll chime in really quick. I think for me that there's a lot that you are making up for. You know, if somebody maybe went through school and nobody really saw that they were functionally illiterate, and that became a future barrier for many jobs that they really didn't understand. And that's something where we uncover later as they're an adult, and that has been holding them back for a long time. And, you know, somebody addressing these root issues of a lot of challenges as soon as possible is how we can really move the needle. But I think for us, you know, we have to do so much. And I think that's why the partnerships are so critical. It's like, I wouldn't know the first thing about teaching a GED class. That is incredibly hard. Yeah. I don't know if I'd pass these days. I went to art school, so I don't know if the math section is something I could do. And I don't think people recognize how hard it is to get your GED, how much motivation you have to even get into a shelter and do those programs and do the things that will help you get to the next level, it is hard. And it shows a lot of dedication, a lot of motivation to even be there and to do those things. So for me, it's those, how can we not keep reinventing the wheel? How can there be specific partnerships where we all get to do what we're best at? Like, how can we help Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries provide as much shelter as possible, and that we can hire as many people as possible from them that may have been repeatedly coming back over and over again, so that we can free up a bed for somebody else. And that continuum keeps moving through so that we can really help people not get stuck in any one spot, and that we all can really play a role in that ecosystem of care and that social safety net, which is so important.
Yeah, Chad?
I think I'm going to be a little bit controversial and being honest about this whole thing.
Bring the controversy.
I think the government is a big barrier for us to do the work right, because most elected officials are not really looking to end homelessness like they claim to be. Instead, they're trying to reduce the number by showing an altered kind of reports to show that they're doing good through their terms to reduce the number of homelessness. So they make a lot of changes without fixing the problem. We'll start by one. Recently, they changed the definition of homelessness, for example. So what does that mean? So if a person came out of prison, doesn't have no place to go, is he a homeless or not homeless? They say for the last 90 days, he had a known address. It was the jail or the prison. So he's no longer, or she's no longer homeless.
Wow.
So they cannot benefit from the service homeless solution dollars. Another example, somebody felt like I need to address my problem and I need to go to inpatient treatment program and I don't have no place to go, and my parents had got rid of me for many reasons, and now I hit the bottom and I need to go back. Now he goes or she goes to inpatient treatment program for 90 days. And they come back and they don't have no place to go. You can't use the shelter. You can't use any voucher. Why? Because you're not homeless. You had a place, which is a treatment program, that is a inpatient program. So you had a known address for the last 90 days. Those are elements to take the numbers of homeless down where they still exist. Another one, for the veterans, for example. The veterans, they have so many vouchers, and they tell the people, they offer the veteran a voucher to go, and he feels, I'm not ready yet to be independent, and I don't want to go to my own place. So he denied the voucher because he's not ready to be independent. So they say he voluntarily denied the voucher. He's no longer a homeless person. Is he homeless or is he not homeless? So those are things that are barriers, because when that person tried to take the first step of benefiting from what is available there for the homeless population, he's no longer qualified for homeless service. So therefore, we would have to go out. We as an organization, we would have to think outside the box on how can we still service that person without reporting them as a homeless person. And then we get slapped on the hand if we take that person in and try to help them under the homeless and report them that you're servicing somebody and you're taking a bed away from somebody who's homeless. So it is a lot of issues that is happening, becoming a big barrier for us. The question is, what is the solution?
Veronika.
The solution is we still have to press on. We still have to do the work. And me personally, I've been with Detroit Rescue Mission for the last 28 years. Wow. We do what needs to be done, and I really don't care what the government and anybody else says. I just meet the need, and then find partners like Veronika, for example, or other that we can work with and make sure we address the need as it arises every single day.
I mean, I think the industry, the community there needs a little bit of a rebel spirit like that, Audi. And Veronika, you had something to say as well?
To Chad's point, I describe it as a game of cups. you are hiding numbers and hiding people. And that has a powerful effect. Not only does it make their job so much harder to serve people, but it also changes how much money we get as a state, as a city. It affects everything.
So we're talking not only about the extreme difficulties that people experiencing homelessness face when they're navigating the system, but also for you as service providers, the levels of bureaucracy that you have to peel back and fight within to try and offer those services.
Indeed, indeed. So you are just tuning into the Metro on WDET FM. We're talking about the problem of homelessness. Today, we've got Chad Audi from Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries and Veronika Scott from Empowerment Plan to help us better understand the many ways homelessness manifests here in Detroit and Metro Detroit. And we also want to hear from you. What do you do, or who do you think is responsible for addressing the problem, and how do you interact with people experiencing homelessness? Robin and I talked a little bit about our personal experiences, so we want to hear from you. It's 313-577-1019. Let us know, 313-577-1019. We have callers waiting to hit the airwaves. You all stay right there.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And we're chatting with Chad Audi of Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries and Veronika Scott of Empowerment Plan about homelessness in Detroit and southeastern Michigan. We're also asking you, our listener, about your experience with people facing homelessness. How do you interact with those facing homelessness? And who should be responsible for helping people experiencing homelessness? Give us a call. It's 313-577-1019. Headed to the phone lines now. Actually, we have Jerlene here out of Pontiac. Jerlene, welcome to the Metro.
Hello. I was calling because I have experience being in the NSO, and my experience with those girls there were of a great variety, but I found that several would like to be in a position of volunteering while they're waiting for help into becoming housed. And, the biggest problem is transportation. So, but I think these girls would love to have the opportunity to get out and get away to work. And some have worked, some off and on. But I myself, I kind of aged out. I'm 70 years old. So I tried to offer information I could help. And I have been placed in housing. But for them, I'm telling you, being there, it's a whole new world. And it's not as unpleasant as most people would think. But it would be very helpful if they would be allowed to volunteer and get into some work to help themselves. But like I said, the biggest problem is the transportation.
Jerlene, thank you for calling this morning. We are going to get into, in just a moment, some opportunities. We're going to find out about some volunteering opportunities that you can pass along. But first, I wonder if you're open to telling us a little bit more about your experiences with homelessness.
Well, that was a really shock for me because I was literally leaving from one place, going to another, but sometimes the waiting list was the problem. So since the waiting list was the problem, I ended up waiting on the street. This lady telling me, you know, after she took the application, she said that I was next. I'd go to the top of the list. I would be next on the list because of my age and my disability. Female, just everything about me. She said I was accepted, and next thing I know, I said, well, okay, what number am I on the list? May I ask? She said 23. Then I started calling, She kept saying 23, 23, 23. So I'm like, well, let's moving it all. So I found out by going to the building that from a lady I knew that lived there. They were going through a renovation and she was upset with it. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, that's better than not having a place, you know.
Mm.
But I ended up calling the police and they helped me get to the NSO.
Wow.
Jerlina, I am looking here at Chad Audi of the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, and he is visibly reacting to what you're saying. Chad, I want to bring you into the conversation. Tell me how common this is, waiting lists, and trying to get people connected to the services that you provide.
Well, first of all, the system in Detroit is broken. We talked about it a million times, and every vehicle that we can talk, and no one give us an ear. So today, like, she is experiencing a homeless person will call the CAM, and they will tell them, we'll get back with you. After they have to wait sometimes 1 hour, hour and a half on the phone. And then at the end of the conversation will be, we don't have no place for you. Mm. Mm-hmm. And this is a homeless person, doesn't have no place to go, calling for help. And then after you take 1 hour and a half, in an hour between 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 p.m., where usually this is a business hours, people get a lot of money to find a solution for the people who are calling. Instead, they're telling them, hey, we'll get back with you, and you're number 23, and you're number 25, and number 80. So we beginning of Monday, we will be launching a new program. So DRMM decided, after we complained for a long time, that we need to step up and do something. So we are introducing something called Shelter on Demand, which means that anybody who calls our number that we will be providing next Monday, they will immediately be placed in the shelter, no waiting period, and the number will be answered by a live person 24/7. Wow. So it would not be any more. So we're not giving them. So this is the deal. We don't want people to think that, oh, okay, so now he's going to give me an apartment and a house, and not true. What we want to do, we don't want the person to be living in their cars. We don't want them to be living somewhere not safe. We will bring them in to one of our shelters. We will give them a good meal. We'll let them have a good shower. They will have a safe place to sleep for the night. And the next morning, a case manager will be talking to them to see how can we go to the next steps. But at least they're not going to be, you can't call anyone. No one answer your phone. Right. You go to a voicemail, and then if you got to somebody after an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, they will tell you we'll put you in the queue, so your number, whatever and whatever. So beginning of Monday, the good news is we will be releasing that number, and then we will be also circulating vans, but this is only within the city of Detroit, so we can't go farther than Detroit at this time. And if somebody does not have transportation, we will be sending somebody, that's 24/7 as well, to go in and pick up that person, whether if it's a women and children or if it's a single man, and then we will take them to a safe place and start them in the process of self-independency.
Wow.
Yes, I know, indeed. And Chad, that is December 2nd, which is Monday. So that phone number goes live December 2nd, which is this upcoming Monday. You can find more information at drmm.org as well. 313-993-4700. If you guys want to take that number down now, that's the number to call on Monday, December 2nd. Now, Veronika, I see your hand up. Veronika, go ahead.
Listening to her talk about being in the shelter and having people want to do something, want to volunteer, want to give back, that just hit home for me. That's something that when I first started Empowerment Plan, I remember a board member of a shelter, not the shelters, that told me, you're not going to get a person experiencing homelessness to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, let alone a coat. They were like, this is going to fail. You're not going to be able to hire people from shelters. And I knew they were wrong personally from my own experience. I was like, that's not the case. I know, because my mom was incredibly dedicated. And let me tell you, every day when we are making coats, when we are making these coats that transform into sleeping bags, part of why people want to work there, yes, it's a job, but also they know that it is going to thousands of people around the world that are in situations potentially that they've been in. I can tell you I've also hired individuals that used the coat at some point in their life, that lived in it, and that they are now in charge of making them and producing them and then making them reach all of these individuals that were potentially in similar situations. So for me, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions for individuals in shelters, like, oh, everyone's lazy. That big, like, awful, immediate thought of, oh, they're there for a reason. They're lazy. They don't want to work. You have to, do you understand? Just navigating the system is work. Doing this every day is work. And you have people that want to work at Empowerment Plan mostly just because of the fact that it gives back to somebody else. That's a huge part of the job. And to address our big concern about transportation, that is a very fun Michigan problem, where public transit, bus schedules, all those things. And that's one of the things we work on constantly at Empowerment Plan.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, because Veronika, I wanted to stick with you for a moment because there's a few things, of course, you hit on, both you and Chad, but Veronika, you hit on one, I think Chad did as well, but you talked about the numbers of the individuals in homelessness and how the government may use those numbers to kind of help with themselves. And I often think about when I see a number or a percentage that's representing the homeless population, especially here in Metro Detroit or Detroit, I think to myself, those are humans. Those aren't just numbers. Those aren't just percentages. Those are actual human beings who do not have a place to lay their head tonight in a safe, comfortable space. And so oftentimes we get lost in this abstract idea of it when it's actually so much more real and concrete. Veronika, get into that a little bit more, because oftentimes people go unnoticed and unseen because they're a part of that number.
Yep. And that they're just considered another number that's moving around from organization to organization, and not considered an individual person that has individual challenges that are not going to fit through a standardized system, that they actually need care that is tailored to them. One of the things that I've seen recently, we were a part of the PIT count. So that's the point in time count in January. That's how we get some of those numbers. Right. And that is through HUD, which is the federal agency. And they know that number is not accurate. So just so you know, when we went out and we did the count, and I went out from 10 p.m. till 4 a.m. with a cell phone and like 3 other people, we weren't allowed to count people in their cars. We're not allowed to go into certain buildings. And what we found out that night was, this is in January, the coldest night of the year usually, they only had 2 shelter beds available. I as a person, talked to 5 men that needed a bed that night. Wow. I talked to a man who was retirement age that was renting out a storage unit, but he could only be there during the day. And he was staying out in the cold all night just so he didn't have to go to the bathroom, because he was terrified of, he can't fall asleep, so he'll sleep in his storage unit during the day. And those are that is the person behind the numbers. And I was one of our group, talked to 15, not let alone all the other individuals everybody else interacted with that night at 2:00 in the morning in one of the coldest nights of the year, going, okay, where are you going right now? What happened? Somebody's house burned down. Somebody's doubling up somewhere else. Somebody's sleeping in their car, but it got too cold. They don't have money for gas. All of those things. There are humans behind these numbers, and we have to remind ourselves that this needs to be connected to the individual.
I want to stay on that notion, if we could, Veronika, and have you talk about what it means to interact with people experiencing homelessness in a compassionate way. What does that look like?
I know Chad and I could both talk about this for hours. I think that's one of the things for me that blows my mind is, as an example of what not to do, we've had people come into our space, especially early on, and go for tours and try to slide money across a sewing machine to somebody and try to give them money, or basically talk to them of what was it like being addicted to drugs? Was the first question I remember that somebody on my team got asked. And she was like, what makes you think that? What? I'm a single mom. I had an issue with domestic violence. I had to flee a horrible situation. You shouldn't pity me. You should admire me. I am still here
and strong.
And then to the person that got money slid to them at work Imagine somebody coming into your job and trying to give you a couple dollars. You're like, excuse me? She's like, I don't need this. And one of the things for me, it's like, well, what did you expect to see when you showed up here today at Empowerment Plan, when you interact with the people that we employ? And everyone has that image in their head, exactly like what Chad said. They have this image of this person on a street corner, and they think they're lazy or struggling with addiction or struggling with mental health or unsafe, and a lot of times not even human in their mind, treated like part of the landscape. And I think you guys touched on it a little bit too, which is bringing back humanity, talking to somebody like you would talk to a friend, that you would talk to a family member, you would talk to somebody at work, immediately thinking that this person has as much value as you do. I think that's the biggest thing to think about. And if you can't do $1, you can't do money, you can't do it, just interacting with this person. Hey, how's your day going? Hi, my name is this. What is your name?
Yeah.
Those are handshakes, hugs. People, I remember, would, especially in the early days, treat our team members as if homelessness was contagious, as if if I touch this person, that's going to rub off on me. And then therefore, because of this big unknown scary thing that they can't imagine living through, they are now treating individuals like they are, one, not human or contagious. And so I think for me, as a reminder of like bringing that humanity back into what you're doing, you can meet people exactly where you are and meet them where they are. You don't have to change into different clothes, whatever. Just walk up to somebody and have a conversation.
That's right. Just looking folks in the eyes and saying hello, even that small action is meaningful.
Truly, truly is. Thank you so much, Veronika, for that. But we want to go to the calls right now, go to the phones. Want to say hello to Anka in Royal Oak. Anka, how are you doing?
Hey, hi, how are you?
Doing really well. So you have a comment?
I'm having an interesting time, but I'm listening, but not. I haven't been able to concentrate fully. So I hope I haven't missed anything too significant. As you all know me, but your guests don't, and some of your listeners don't. I'm from Royal Oak. My name is Anka. I'm a trans woman. I'm older, trans woman, but I don't qualify yet for Social Security. But I'm on disability. I get $943 a month. You can't work. Nobody is homeless because they want to be. That's number one. I hope we establish that. Number two, you're right. You don't necessarily know who's homeless. As a Lyft and Uber driver now, that I'm no longer homeless, I pick up a lot of people from hotels that are living in hotels. I don't know if they declare themselves homeless or not. I usually don't pry into that, but they're homeless. That's why they're there. And they're struggling, and maybe they don't want to admit that they're homeless or let people know because they're embarrassed. Nobody's proud to be homeless, though. And what I can tell you from being around Oakland Livingston Human Services Administration and Liz Laren, who's worked in their shelter housing for years, and Beth Wackerly, and then around Corktown and Affirmations and Brendan Bell, these people work really hard to try to get people in. There's not enough housing, though, available, and there are restrictions to it. Now, for instance, as a trans woman, they're going to try to place me in a male shelter where I don't belong. Okay? I think that there is more than enough male shelters. That's where I disagree with your one guest. But I think that one of the big problems is that there's so many entities involved in this, just like in community health. They're all getting a piece of the pie. They're all getting salaries. Nobody's doing this for volunteerism. They don't make enough money, I can tell you that much.
Anka, you're bringing up something really important that we've been talking about this hour, and I thank you for that. And that is that there is a bit of a patchwork when it comes to service providers and their ability to work in concert with each other, and then also for them to then interact with the government and the bureaucracy of that. And Veronika, I saw you were nodding there for a moment. You had something to say about this, and then we'll go to you, Chad.
Well, particularly when they were bringing up, trans rights and individuals that need to feel safe in certain environments. I know that's been a huge thing over the last few decades. It's just that safety and lack thereof, and how can you be treated as an individual that you need to be treated as. And also there's a higher rate of violence for individuals that are homeless and trans, and that is very high, and it is devastating, and people don't talk about it, that it is not a safe thing to try to navigate these systems that haven't been historically designed for you or even with you in mind at all. And so I think that's been something I've seen a couple of great advocates take on, but the discrimination, the lack of support, the safety issues there are very real. And I don't want to underestimate that. That's a huge vulnerable population that we need to do more, that a lot of agencies are doing their best to try to navigate. But to Chad's point, there's a lot of very intense restrictions that are placed on a lot of these entities that they have to try to navigate within, which is so hard because things are changing. Things are changing constantly. The needs of who we serve are changing constantly. And so there's some great organizations that I've seen that have created just safe spaces for LGBTQ plus like populations, especially youth. Big fan of Ruth Ellis, big fan of a lot of these organizations that create these safe spaces, especially when you think of vulnerability compounded on vulnerability.
This is the Metro on WDET. We're talking about the problem of homelessness. Today, we've got Chad Audi from Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries and Veronika Scott from Empowerment Plan to help us understand the many ways homelessness manifests here in Detroit and Metro Detroit. And we want to hear from you. How do you interact with your homeless neighbors? And who's responsible for trying to address the problem of homelessness? Let us know by calling in. The number is 313-577-1019. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Chad Audi from Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries and Veronika Scott of Empowerment Plan. We're discussing people facing homelessness in Detroit and southeastern Michigan. And we're asking you to give us your thoughts. How do you interact with people experiencing homelessness? And who should be responsible for solving this problem? Our number is 313-577-1019. Let us know about your experiences.
I want to say thank you to Anka as well as our earlier caller from earlier this hour for giving us a call at 313-577-1019. We're still looking for a few more callers as well. But just going back to this conversation and tying it back in, Anka talked about it just a little bit, and you talked about it as well. Men in shelters,
right? And
the perception there and what it looks like, Chad. I know personally for myself, I have a brother who's in and out of the different shelters in here in the community. NOS, very, very big for us as well. NSO, sorry, Neighborhood Service Organization. Yes. But just thinking about the different places and spaces that have been able to help him, I just think about the places that help men. So let's talk about what you all do, especially for men, and especially being unique in that space.
Yes, actually, there was a lot of providers who service men, but in the last 2 years, most of them had, not actually all of them has closed, with the exception to Detroit Rescue Mission. But people get confused and they say there's more than one shelter because our shelters, Detroit Rescue Mission, are named different names. So some of them, they call them Oasis. They think this is not a Detroit Rescue Mission, this is another organization. The truth is there's right now 4 shelters for men, and they all operated by Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries. The last one, Salvation Army had closed. NSO do not help anymore men. They bring them off the street, but then they have to bring them to an actual shelter. So there is a difference between street outreach for the people who go out and identify the people who are homeless and try to put them into a shelter. Unfortunately, at this time, Detroit Rescue Mission is the only one still functioning to help the individual homeless as well as individual men homeless and men with children. The last one closed last year. They had a 40-bed was available outside the Detroit Rescue Mission. They closed because of some issues that they have. So, and also, I agree with the last caller that people who are transgender, they might face some type of issues when they go to shelters. And this is for two reasons. Number one, most of the shelters are not equipped yet to help transgender population. So if it was like a male shelter, it's a male shelter. If it's a female shelter, it's a female shelter. And we're doing the transition, even the Detroit Rescue Mission, to have what we call it family shelter and non-gender identified shelters. That will help, but we're not there. I criticize myself, and because that also require a lot of funding, because you need neutral bathrooms, which cost money to rehab your facilities and to get them up to the level that you need. But for the bottom line, at least I can speak for Detroit Rescue Mission, we do not discriminate who comes to us, and we try to accommodate every need that we can, and we don't treat a person as a case or as a number. Every human being who comes to us is a human being, deserve the respect, and then our goal is to preserve their dignity and respect at all times. So there will be sometimes some issues or somebody does not know how to deal with some particular person? Yes. And that happens with me raising my kids. Sometimes I make a mistake on how to do it. So, but the key within our shelter especially, that most of the people who work the shelter had been client before.
Yeah. So Chad,
we hired them.
We're going to jump back into the phones really quickly. We have two folks that are hanging out. We're actually three folks hanging out. So let's see if we can get through this. Brother Fred Capuchin, actually, we're going to chat with you right now on the phone. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. You're from the Capuchin Soup Kitchen and believes you should welcome guests into her space. Let's give us a little bit more of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. The Capuchin Soup Kitchen, I think we really pride ourselves in, first of all, we don't refer to the individuals who come into our space as clients or anything like that. We call them guests because we're creating a space of hospitality like we would welcome a guest into our own home. And so creating that space and welcoming whoever comes to the door. We don't ask a lot of questions. We just provide that space for them to be able to have a hot meal or pick up groceries or pick up clothing. One of the things that I did when I first came into the soup kitchen is we used to, when a guest would come in and pick up clothing, we would say, 30 male items, 30 female items, 30 male child items. And I just took that language out and said just 30 adult items, 30 kids items. So then that way the guests can feel comfortable picking out whatever clothes that they feel are appropriate for them.
Thank you so much, Brother Fred, for letting us know a little bit more about how you all welcome guests into your space. And now we want to bring in Leslie Wilson. Leslie Wilson is from Wayne State University. Leslie, give us a little bit of your insight.
We are part of Wayne State University. We're called the HIGH program, helping individuals go higher. We provide emergency funding for Wayne State students who find themselves, who are either precariously housed or homeless. We've had students who were living out of their car, thriving academically. They come to us in a couple of different ways. Number one, that we have an application process where they can apply, and we will process their application. That's actually how we have help all of our students. But sometimes we do events on campus, and students will walk up to us and say, or we'll find out from a professor or someone on campus, that this particular student is actually homeless or just surfing from couch to couch and does not have stable housing. That's actually how our program started. We had a medical student that was living out of their car. And so once we found that out, rallied all of the troops to get funding available for this student to get them in stable housing. So you have students who are thriving academically that find themselves in situations like this, either because of an illness, because of they're fleeing a domestic violence situation, that type of thing.
Sure. Leslie Wilson of Helping Individuals Go Higher, and that's a program at Wayne State University. Thank you for accentuating the fact that homelessness, housing insecurity looks very different. It has many different faces. Chad, Audi, you were just nodding, saying, oh, this is a person I know. Yes. This is someone within my space.
Right. Actually, we deal with Wayne State. We work with the Chief Police, Chief Holt, when they encounter anybody who is homeless and all his officers, they know they talk to us immediately and we accommodate. And then we will talk with Ms. Wilson later to see what kind of help we can provide to people who are experiencing homelessness. It is a big problem in our city, especially. We're very proud on how Detroit has developed, but also it created a big problem and burden on people who their income did not get to the level that they can afford still living in the city, and causing us a lot of people to become working homeless. Again, the individuals are a human being like any of us. They're not a second-class citizen. They're not like Veronika has said earlier. Some people feel like it's contagious to talk to them or shake their hands. They're very good people. Actually, their heart is big. They love. If you ask a homeless person to help another person, he will be the first one to jump in and help. So people need to realize homelessness is not a disease. It is not something to be ashamed of. Any of us could be a homeless person at any time.
We're all humans.
We are all humans. We want to bring in Yvonne in. Yvonne, actually, out of Shelby Township. You want a little advice?
Yeah. So, hi. How is everyone?
Doing well. How are you?
Hi, Yvonne.
Good. So I've been going a lot to St. Peter's Episcopal Church down in Corktown. And it's a great spot to actually have the community interact with homeless people. I think that's one of the first steps, is becoming friends and not being afraid. It doesn't matter. Some of these people do have scary stories, but you know what? You just have to take it. Life is hard, and if we are looking at homeless people as not human, that's the first thing. I think people need to take that step and have homeless people be their friends. I know we use now the words people experiencing homelessness. However you want to put it, I think that there's a fear. I think people just drive by and ignore it. And I think St. Peter's is a great place where they have a soup kitchen, for instance. But one of the things that, even though I've been able to become friends, I still don't know how to, direct these people to services that would help them. I feel like there should be more posters. I feel like there should be more access
Yvonne,
to that information.
You are right. Absolutely. I think we're going to direct folks to look up Empowerment Plan and to look up Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, 2 places you can go right now to figure out how you can help folks. Veronika Scott from the Empowerment Plan and Chad Audi from the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, thank you both for joining us on the Metro to help us better understand homelessness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. See you tomorrow.